it's Wacky Anime What If here to present you with What If Issei was betrayed and ate the Ito no Mi, Part 1. Let's go and get into it. Currently, Issei Hyodo is walking towards Kyohai, but while walking, he can't help but to notice in the sky's getting darker and clouds are starting to roll in. It's probably gonna rain, he thinks, before continuing his walk towards the gates of Kyo. As he takes one step through the gate, he notices everyone staring at him, not in their usual looks of disgust with females. No, everyone's staring at him, and they're glaring at him quite obviously. He can surmise as he sees people glaring at him with deep hatred, with malice hidden in their eyes. Issei can't help but wonder, what did he do exactly? As he continues walking, trying to avoid staring at people, as he makes it all the way to the front door of the building, he tries to open the door, but it opens immediately, as someone opens it as quickly as possible, and then socks Issei directly in the jaw, causing him to fall to the ground and holding his jaw in place. He immediately looks directly towards the person who did it, and it was Matsuda. Matsuda socked him in the jaw. He immediately asked, "Hey, what was that for?" And Matsuda said nothing. His eyes were cold, they were quite distant, as he walked towards Issei and said, "You know exactly what it was for," as he proceeded to punch Issei in the face, make it to where he fell back down to the ground as he was trying to lift himself up. Before Matsuda got on top of him and started to wail on him, he started to punch Issei over and over directly in the face for what seemed like almost 5 minutes, before Motohama appeared behind him and pulled him off for a few seconds. Issei was quite in relief that Motohama was helping him, until Motohama said a few words. "Hey, you're taking all the fun," as he kicks Issei in the face and he falls back to the ground, not being able to get up before Motohama quickly kicks him on the side, flipping him over to where his back is directly in front of him, and they start to literally stomp on his back, is what Matsuda does, while Motohama kicks him directly in the side, causing it to where some of his actual ribs are starting to break. They're starting to crack. His ribs are starting to crack. They're not completely broken yet, but the kicks are making it worse and worse. The cracks are going further and further, and Issei's consistently coughing up blood, but they don't really care. They continuously do it over and over, as Issei lifts up his head trying to ask a question. Motohama kicks his head back down, as Issei asks, quite literally muffled by the ground that he's currently stuck to right now, as he says, "What did I even do?" As Motohama says, "You know what you did. You were in gang wars. You own a gang. You killed multiple people most likely, and you forced yourself on to Rias," he says. As Issei says, "I did none of those. Where did you even hear that from?" And immediately Motohama said, "We heard it from everyone. We heard it from everyone from our school. We know what type of person you are now," as they started to kick him harder and more intensely, as Issei forced his head upwards. Even though the foot of Motohama was still in the back of his head, he forced his head upwards just to look at all the glares that everyone was giving towards him, and it all made sense now, and he couldn't help but to laugh. So he started laughing a little bit. The laugh sounded odd. It didn't sound like Issei's normal laugh. No, it sounded much more twisted and vile. As he started to laugh louder and louder as he was getting kicked. He forced himself upwards, pushing Motohama and Matsuda directly off of him, and he started to laugh and look at everyone and said, "So, you believe I did all that, without any evidence whatsoever to back it up?" He looks at Matsuda and Motohama, and he says, "Can't believe I was friends with you two," he says, with his glare intensifying to them, causing shivers down their spines, but they both look at him and say at the same time, Matsuda and Motohama both say, "We were never friends," as Issei felt a crack going in his head, as if something was broken on the inside of him, but he chose to ignore it, as he turned his back towards them and said, "Then so be it," as he walked towards the door, and was about to open it, only for it to open again, and he sees two people who he despises before. Didn't really hate them, but now he definitely despises them, since he can see already from their cold, distant eyes and looks of disgust that they already believed it. As Katniss immediately, Katniss pulls out her actual kendo blade, her kendo stick, and hit Issei directly onto the knee, causing him to fall down because he was still weakened from the beating he took. And immediately, as he fell to the ground, Moriyama immediately began to beat him over the head with the kendo stick, while Matsuda and Motohama decided to join in. Even though they got their first round, they wanted a round two. So they started kicking him in the back, pummeling him to the ground, as both of the kendo girls continuously ruthlessly beat him with the kendo sticks over and over on the back, causing lashes on his back, to where you could see him bleeding, and you could see the purple bruises all over him as they finally finished after what seemed like an eternity for Issei. And multiple broken bones is what you could probably tell from just looking at how Issei gets up. As they left and went to the class, Issei got up, but he got up very slowly. It was a struggle, and everything that he was staring at was dizzy. It was as if he was going to collapse at any moment. But as he got up and he was bleeding out of his mouth, blood gushing out, and he was bleeding out of his arms. Both of them felt like they were grinded to dust from the blows that he took. Especially his back, though. His back had the worst of it. It felt as if it was going to snap in half at any moment when he was getting up, but it thankfully did not. As Issei finally got up, he walked all the way into the school and went all the way up the stairs into the nurse's office. As soon as he knocked on the door, the nurse opened the door and had a smile on her face until she saw Issei's. And then she says, "What do you want?" As Issei says, "I'm injured. I need some help," he said in a desperate voice. But all that the nurse did was slam the door in his face and says, "We're closed. Come back never." While Issei was hoping he would get some medical treatment, but then he realized, guess not, so he heads to class, hoping that the teacher will send him to the nurse's office anyway, and that he could actually tell her that he was sent there, so that she wouldn't close the door in his face. So as Issei walked to the classroom and was about to ask the teacher, he opened the door, noticing the teacher isn't there yet, but he notices that all 25 students in his classroom are all there, staring at him as soon as he opened the door, glaring, and Issei could already tell what type of glares those were, and as if a danger sense went off in the back of his mind, he turned around and was about to leave, until all of a sudden the back of his collar was grabbed, and he was thrown directly into the classroom, directly in the back of the class. And as he was thrown in the back of the class, he immediately hit his back. And as soon as he hit his back to the wall, it felt like a crippling pain. He fell to the ground because he couldn't stand when he was hit to the wall. He couldn't stand from the pain. When he fell to the ground, they all thought, well, it's an open invite, as all 25 of the students went up towards him. Some of them picked out pencils and started stabbing into his legs or into his side. Some people started to kick him ruthlessly. Some people started to punch him in the face over and over, while some picked his head up and started bashing him against the desk, causing him to lose some teeth, causing it to where his eyes were bleeding. But they didn't care. They continuously went on and on and on for over an hour until the teacher finally arrived. When the teacher finally arrived and opened the classroom door, walking towards the front where his desk was, just looking at all the students and says, "Go ahead and sit down." As all of them were sitting down, Issei was expecting them to have some sort of punishment, but no, there was none. And all Issei heard was, "Issei, if you don't get in your seat, then you'll have detention." And Issei immediately saw the teacher's cold eyes and realized he's not going to receive any help that he wanted. he already knew it, so as soon as he got up, he was about to go towards his desk to sit down, but he was kicked in the back and forced back to the ground, where he puked up a little bit of blood. But the teacher saw this and said, "Clean that up before you get to your seat." So Issei cleaned up his blood as he tried to get back up. But as soon as he got back up, walked towards his desk, very groggily and swaying side to side. Immediately, when he made it to his desk, the person beside him literally stuck out their leg, and he tripped over and fell into the desk very brutally. And when he hit the metal side that connected to the desk, immediately he felt immense pain from his left side. He was about to scream, but he forced it down. More cracks were forming in his ribs, and mostly all over most of his bones, as Issei had to tough it out. He had to tough out the pain, because the teacher wouldn't let him go, even when he asked. No, he consistently say, "Stop being a baby, Issei. After all the gang fights and stuff you've went through, you should be able to tough this little class out." Immediately, when it was time to go, the bell rung, and it was next class. Issei got up in a hurry and went out towards the door, trying to go to the ORC to see what was up, trying to ignore the pain, or probably at least get to where Asya can heal him. As he opened the front door and was about to go, as he opened the front door of the class, everyone got up and walked towards him. Issei looked behind him just to already see that they had the intent to absolutely brutalize him. So Issei did what any sane person would. He opened the door very quickly, slammed it behind him, and started running for his life, as everyone started chasing him. Not just from his class, from multiple different classes. They all left their classrooms just to chase him, and they kept on telling where he was. Luckily, he was good at hiding, so he managed to hide just enough to where everyone left back to their classrooms. But as they did, Issei immediately went out of the shadow that he was hiding in and walked directly towards the ORC. And as he did, he felt an ominous presence. He felt an ominous sense saying not to go, but he ignored it. He ignored it completely, and he will forever regret this. As Issei walked all the way into the ORC, he went all the way up the stairs of the building and didn't even think about knocking on the door, but ended up opening it, and saw that Rias was there doing her paperwork, and the rest of the ORC were just nowhere to be found. As Issei wobbled in and closed the door behind him, Rias was still on her paperwork. She looked up at Issei and saw him for a split second, and Issei expected her eyes to be warm, or to show some semblance of care for him, but no. The eyes were cold and distant, as if she's never seen him before. Issei immediately says, "Rias, what are all the rumors about?" As he says this, she immediately says, "I don't know, maybe they might have made them up." And he said, "Is it because you guys were avoiding me? Why were you guys avoiding me?" He says out with a grunt as blood came out of his mouth as he coughed it up. But Rias paid no mind and said, We're avoiding you because, well, we were avoiding you for the process of you being kicked out of the barrage, which has been effective now since we already received the okay. Don't worry, you can keep your little pawn pieces. I don't need them," is what she says, because she has more. She pulls out 8 pieces, perfectly places them on the desk, and says, "We don't need that, but we do need your gear." Immediately, Issei says, "Wait, what?" As his eyes were completely shadowed by his hair. He said, "So you were just using me this entire time?" And immediately she said, "Of course I was. What did you think you were? Did you think I actually liked you?" She says, and her eyes didn't just turn cold. They grew disgusted, as she literally physically started to try to vomit, which she proceeded to, directly into the trash bin beside her, and says, "That's disgusting. Who would ever love someone like you? I don't even think your parents do." And as that was said, Issei felt like he was about to snap. And as he was getting closer towards Rias, All that Rias did was snap her fingers, and the rest of the ORC appeared out of absolutely nowhere out of their hiding spots, grabbed Issei and pinned him down to the ground, while Kiba had a blade pointing directly to the side of his neck, and Kiba said, "If you ever try to be aggressive towards Madam President, I'll be forced to remove your head from your body," he says in a cold voice, a cold tone that would only be given to an enemy. Issei immediately looked towards all the ORC in eyes of betrayal, only to see Koneko didn't really care. Asuya didn't care, neither did Kiba or anyone else. They all just held him down, and Akeno was actually using some of her lightning magic just to make it to where he'd feel more pain. His grunts of pain made her very, very happy, as Issei looked around in betrayal and stared directly in front of him at Rias, who was heading straight for him, and appeared directly in front of him, looking down at him. And Issei says, "What are you gonna do now, huh?" She says, "I'm just gonna remove your sacred gear. Don't worry, after that you can do whatever you want. I don't really care." As she grabs Issei's arm, the arm he sacrificed to save her from Riser, and immediately she lifts it up with his body being lifted up, his limp body from how he's been manhandled today so badly he can't really move as much as he'd like to. So he wasn't able to put up that much of a fight. The rest of the ORC let go, noting this, and as soon as they let go, Rias lifted up his hand, lifted his face directly in front of hers, and said, "Oh yeah, before I forget to tell you," she whispers in his ears, "Would you die for me?" And Issei heard this on repeat as Rainier screamed it in his head over and over as she said this, almost ignoring the fact that when she started to pull Issei's arm harder and harder, and immediately he felt a sense of pain as all of a sudden his arm was missing now. He fell to the ground in pain, holding his nub that he had now, as Asuya had already healed it immediately. And Issei looked at them in so much disdain, and he was screaming. But all that got him was a kick in the face from Rias. He fell to the ground, and she looked at him and says, "Now why don't you be a good dog and shoo?" She said that while she had the boosted gear in her hand, with some of his blood still flowing out of the gear, and Issei still felt a searing pain, even though his arm was healed. It was the pain not just from his arm, it was from his very soul, since the gear was attached to it. When it was ripped out, he felt a piece of him leave as well. As he got up and was about to walk out of the room, he looked behind him one last time and said, "I'll make you regret this," he said in a deep, dark tone, one that was very cold, one that showed no kindness, one that Issei would never usually have, shocking everyone in the ORC as he glared at them. They felt a sense of dread around them. Issei immediately slammed the door behind him with such force that a few frames in the ORC went off, and off the wall. And as soon as Issei was about to leave, he left the ORC, heading directly to the front gate, only to be met with the Kendo team directly there, with Motohama and Matsuda both there, staring at him. And immediately, the Kendo team asked, "Are you ready for a beatdown?" As Issei looked at them, and he had his nub arm behind him so they couldn't see it, and he moved his arm to the side. When they saw his arm was missing, they all gasped, and Issei says, "Huh, why do you care now, huh? You see, I tried caring, but that didn't work." As he said this, his eyes grew a little bit darker, but no one could really see it because his hair was covering it. No one could see his eyes, and that kind of freaked them out. As Issei started charging towards them with anger flowing through his very blood, enraged, he ran towards the Kendo team, grabbing Katniss, and slammed her head against the ground with such force it actually caused a crater with her face imprinted on it. And Issei merely stomped on the back of her head, like how Motohama and Matsuda did. And then he figured, for some irony, he pulled out the kendo stick and started beating the absolute shit out of her. Then he turned to the rest of the kendo team and basically grabbed them and started brutalizing them. As he got to Matsuda and Motohama, he immediately looked at them with such scary eyes that they saw a glance of that they passed out. But Issei went up towards their passed out bodies, lifted them both up with one hand, mind you, and literally hung them on the actual gate of Kyo, while he proceeds to grab a huge actual tree branch he found and starts to literally beat them over and over. As you could see scratches starting to form up on them, and you could see giant gushes of blood coming out of them as Issei consistently started beating them. His actual eyes started to show madness in them as he started to laugh, a terrifying laugh, before he throws the tree branch to the ground and starts walking all the way home, while looking quite drunk because of how beaten he truly is. As Issei is heading all the way home, and he stops right outside the door. As soon as he opens it, he sees something. He sees his mom and his dad directly in the living room. As Issei is walking in, he falls on the couch. But as soon as he walks in to the living room, he falls on the couch. But before he can even fall on the couch, Issei's dad grabs his hand, and he thought that he was going to support him up or something. But no, all that Issei's dad did was throw him away, threw him directly out of the house, and says, "I don't want your dirty hands on my furniture," he said, as he stared towards Issei with cold eyes, and so did his mother. And Issei says, "What is this about?" As he gets up, and they say, "You know what it's about. It's because of your perverted antics. You force yourself on someone. You're a villain, vile. No one will ever care for you. Just get out of our house, because we definitely don't." And Issei just looks at them and says, "Huh. Wow, funny thing is, the feeling's mutual," he says, as he gets up and his eyes are hollow, and he walks away, not knowing where he's going to go, but he knows it's better than here. As he's walking, he goes directly into the forest, because he figured he has nowhere else to go. He only has 10,000 yen, that's enough to just buy him some food, wouldn't even last a few days. As Issei went into the forest trying to find a cave, he managed to find something else as he was stumbling in the forest and tripped over a rock. He started tumbling all the way down a little slope, and as he did, he hit directly into a tree, which it immediately hit into his back. And then he noticed something beside said tree. As he tried to get up, he noticed some type of chest. He immediately went up to the chest and he opened it. As he opened it, he saw some type of fruit, and then he saw a note beside the fruit and a book under it. He wondered what these are, as he pulled out the note and started to read it. Immediately, the note says as this: "Dear successor, or whoever may find this, my name is Doflamingo. I'm not from your world. I'm from my own, and I did whatever I pleased. The thing is, some straw whatevers ended up spoiling my plan, but I was teleported here. The thing is, when I was teleported here, I had a vision of someone who was betrayed would eventually find this, and they would find my fruit, and they would build upon my legacy. So if that is you, then I wish you the best of luck for your hardships in the future." And immediately noting that at the end it said, "Also, I can't remember him very clearly. All I remember is part of his name. It started with an I." As he finished reading this and finished reading about the abilities that the said fruit had, and the fact that if he eats this, he won't be able to go in any form of water, really. Well, for most forms of water. As Issei grabs the fruit and starts to contemplate on whether to eat it or not, but then he has this recurring phrase in his head as Rainier voices, "Will you die for me?" And then it's overlapped with Rias, "Will you die for me?" They both consistently talk over and over, "Will you die for me?" Till they overlap into one voice. And Issei just has enough, and he just scarfs down the entire fruit. And he has his mind set on revenge. As he scarfs down the entire fruit, he notes that it tastes awful. The worst thing he's ever tasted in his life. He wants to throw it up, but he knows he needs this power. He doesn't want it, he needs it, he says in his head. As he scarfed down the fruit, he noticed that his hand, his still remaining hand, the tip of his finger started to fire out wires. And Issei said, maybe if I try to call it back. He calls back the wires, successfully. Then he looks towards the nub and says, I wonder if I could. As he was thinking this, he ended up making it to where his nub turned into wires, and then it started to rearrange itself into what seems like a hand silhouette, as the wires started to form into a hand silhouette, and successfully turned into one. And Issei realized, now I have my hand back. That's quite neat. As he looked into the book and noted that the front of the book says, hockey. It says, the ways of hockey. Immediately, he started to read through it slightly. Or at least that's what he wanted to do, but he realized he still needs to find a place and everything, so he puts it directly in his pocket and just walks away. And that's What If Issei was betrayed and ate the Ito no Mi Part 1. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, make sure you smash that like button, destroy that subscribe button, and I'll see you probably in the next video.